Right, my name's Phil. I'm come from 20 years clinically in the NHS. Finally got too much, so I walked out and created a physical security company. My view of the NHS, it's very much like this. Bit old, generally in good nick, looks like it's, well maintained, all that sort of stuff, but you really don't want to start opening panels and finding out what's beside them. That is an emergency phone in an NHS hospital, in a lift, in service, not too far from here. So, we're going to go through a few stories. We'll see how far we get through before we get to the end of time. And yes, ChatGPT is going to be critiquing me along the way. So, if you're not sure how the NHS sort of is structured on the clinical side of things, you've got your major sort of specialties. So you've got neurology, cardiology, emergency care, orthopedics with their little hammers that they love so much. And then within that, you've got your subspecialties. So in cardiology, you'll probably have your plumbers who do your coronary arteries, you'll have your electricians who do your pacemakers, that sort of stuff, and then you'll have your mechanics who do your valves and your pumping function, all that sort of thing. And then within that, you've got subspecialties as well. And what that means is you've got a lot of these associations that are very niche that crop up. And the idea is that they bring together all the evidence from all these disparate niche sources and create your guidelines, your best practice, all that sort of thing. But some of them offer accreditation, which I've never really seen the point in, because the patients don't give a crap about accreditation. They don't know what it is. So could you please scan my heart? Yes, thank you very much, goodbye. But they do like to have accreditation, which is essentially a bunch of tick boxes. They come in, they assess the place, have you done this, tick, tick, tick. So we're going to go through a quick story of what happens when security is taken away from the trust and the experts there and is given to the clinical people. And we're going to protect the guilty. We're going to refer to the items in question as probes, because everybody likes a good probing. These were invasive medical devices. They are often very poorly secured in hospitals. It's usually shoved in a clinic room somewhere, security by obscurity, but not in this case. In this case, it was in a solid masonry walled room with going all the way up through the roof void, big solid door, one of the few digilocks that I don't know a bypass for. The code was written on the door frame, but that's a different issue. But the room was solid, and it was built for the storage and preparation of controlled medications with the actual building itself. It wasn't retrofitted or anything. So the probes were kept in essentially pelican cases with foam cutouts, all this sort of stuff. And you could go in there, you could get your probe out, you could prep it, stuff it back in the case, go and see your probee. And then, of course, they'd be returned after use. So if you saw the cases there, you knew that the probes were there. So then we have the accreditation standard that came along. And along with a lot of other clinical stuff, they had security standards. The problem was the accreditation standards were written by the people like me, the people who do the probing. And they insisted that these were stored in a locked cabinet, on display, so you could see when they'd been returned. And we couldn't store them in that room. Couldn't remodel it. It cost thousands to remodel the room. So they put it outside in a secure area. Yes, it could be classed as a secure area, and you certainly can't break into it, not without restricted tools in very restricted catalogues that nobody can access. And you certainly wouldn't walk in to find a homeless person availing themselves of a bed and the charity money. That actually happened. On top of that, the cabinet was secured with a £6 lock from Amazon. If you don't know what a CH751 is, I suggest you go out and buy one and start seeing what it opens. You will be astonished. So obviously security was taken away from the trust and was in this accreditation standard. And it is far easier to comply with the standard, tick the box on the day, than it is to contest it and say, well, actually, we exceed that. But what happens if they disagree on the day? Well, you put a lot of work in for absolutely nothing. This is the one everyone's probably turned up for. So, I have worked in private as well as NHS, so not going to suggest where this was. You may be aware that equipment that comes into the NHS often has a very long lifespan. You're talking kit that came into service before I started, is still in service today. That's over 20 years, and yes, this is Windows NT 4. It's alright, don't worry, this has been upgraded, it's now running Windows XP, so that's all good. This one, firstly, it's not actually networked, thankfully, and only I walk around with my malware on appropriate media. But some of these things are networked. And it brings me to a little bit of a fad of adding cameras to clinical equipment in clinical areas. And I've got two examples of this. First one was an exercise testing machine. Now, if you're not aware of what an exercise test is, you go on a treadmill or a bike, you have electrodes all over your chest, you may have a mask on your face, you may have a scan of your heart with ultrasound before and afterwards. For men, not so bad. For women, frankly, it's very undignified, very revealing, and there shouldn't be cameras in the room. The other example was a pacemaker programmer. The manufacturer of this pacemaker programmer came along and said, we would like to put some extra things on. And we said, have fun. This pacemaker programmer is sat on the desk about 30 degrees. So, yeah, very ergonomic, you like that. And they put this great big webcam module on the top of it. The camera, speakers, microphone. And they said, we asked, why do you want this? Why is it there? The same answer as for the exercise testing machine. Well, we want to be able to give you clinical and technical support as you go along. Firstly, why do you need to see in the room? Secondly, with a pacemaker programmer, why do you need to see up my nose for that? And then we said, well, we're not actually networking this, so we can't use it. And they said, no problem, shove a 4G modem in the side of it. So now you've got a system that has access to clinical data, has a webcam and a microphone in a clinical area, and bypasses all of the protections on the hospital network. As you may have guessed, this got unplugged, thrown in a cupboard, never to be used again. Now, the manufacturers will tell you, quite rightly, that these systems will get supported and they'll get updated. You'll get security updates. And that's fair enough, except for the fact that this is the NHS. We run stuff until it blows up at least once. And the example I gave you of that piece of kit that's been in service for over 20 years and is running Windows NT, well, that's a perfect example. So, yes, for the next 5 or 6 years, that may get support, absolutely. But are you honestly telling me that that is still going to be supported in 10, 15, 20 years' time? Absolutely not. So, something that I would very much like them to stop doing. And an example of how this sort of thing does actually go wrong. This is the tale of a virus that infected a hospital network. For some reason, don't know why, it was the admin computers that were most affected. We found the virus was on the network because some chap was at the reception desk making an appointment. And you know what it's like when you're making an appointment, they say, oh, well, these are the list of appointments on the screen. You pick the one that you want. And he goes, oh, thank you very much. I'll have a look at those. And then the virus goes, payload time. What am I going to be? This was a bit before ransomware, so it rolled that out. Shall I exfiltrate this guy's ultrasound data? No, that's a bit boring. No. Hardcore pornography. So have a look at your screen for your appointments and bing! And that was happening on computers all over the hospital. There was no data breach, there was no data loss. It was just a very embarrassing, mischievous virus. But how did it get on there? Well, we had an ultrasound machine that was running Windows XP embedded. And even at the time, this was a little bit old. It was running on a CRT monitor, so it was pretty old. And there was a trainee who wanted to get their images off this machine for their logbook. So you put them in a logbook, you present them for assessment, they pass you or fail you, thank you very much. And they thought it'd be a great idea to put the USB stick directly into the ultrasound machine, into the very inviting ports on the front of the machine, rather than go to the workstation and download them in a file format they could actually use. And of course, we can guess where the USB stick had been. We can guess that auto run was probably still enabled, and that was an unpatched OS, and yeah, very embarrassing, that one. Next one. This is a current situation. So, the government, it's a bit like alcohol. It won't solve your problems, but it will give you lots of interesting new ones. So the government back in, I think it was the Blair or Brown era, I'm not entirely sure, they wanted a giant central database. They wanted all the NHS to be running off this same central database. Fair enough, good idea. Problem is, when Microsoft says no to a large government contract and says it can't be done, you should probably heed their warning. Now, a company did agree to do it. I think it might have been Crapita, but I'm not entirely sure. And we ended up with essentially a subscription to Microsoft Office. That was it. That's all we got. And why was it so difficult? Well, all of these different elements of the NHS, your GP surgeries, your sub-departments within sub-departments, they'd got their own solutions sorted. So some people were on Excel spreadsheets with random columns that kind of just fitted their workflow. Some people had professional databases. Some people had databases cooked up by the local nerd. 2 of mine are currently managing your clinical information. You should be afraid. Some Access, using Microsoft Access, and some using nothing at all. And as a result, the hospitals are exploding with paperwork. Now, some progress has been made. The Health and Social Care Act came along and mandated that some kind of interoperability was required. And as the general turnover of these systems happens, that is starting to show results. But there is a lot of pressure to relieve ourselves of paper. And they're even throwing fire regulations. You can't have all this combustible material stored here. Thank you very much. The NHS is very much like any other big organisation. It operates in silos. And within these silos, everyone speaks the same language, but if you want to move laterally across silos, it's like a black box pen test. You are screwed. You are literally trusting what you can see, and it's very difficult. A good example of this, at a hospital not too far from here, about 10 years ago, there was a failure in the pathology computer system. The whole thing went down for 1 or 2 weeks. We were absolutely screwed. It was awful. We had to send tests out to other hospitals in the region to be completed. Elective stuff had to be cancelled. It was an absolute nightmare. They've obviously taken that a bit more seriously now. And a few months ago, there was a flood in one of the main server rooms. And the IT department was sending out emails going, "Oh, the world's on fire, it's horrible." And we're going, is it running a bit slower? It might be running a bit slower. Because they had that immediate failover all set up. So when it's within that silo, things can improve and change quite rapidly. Bit more background. The NHS is part of the civil defence legislation, so it needs to be able to operate in all scenarios. So literally, if the building is blown up, we have to turn the car park into a hospital, and we pick out the plan and we go and execute on it. And obviously, we need to be able to access patient records as well. Now, if you're not familiar with PACE, it stands for Primary, Alternate, Contingency, and Emergency, and it's your different stages of plans for how you deal with something. So let's take medical notes for a small niche department and put them into the PACE plan. So your primary has always been your paperwork. All your test results are printed out, shoved into the file. A little summary sheet is filled in with the important information for that visit. Continuation sheets for anything really, really long-winded and important that are filled in. And you shove that in a plastic wallet, you shove it in a filing cabinet, and then you get it out when you need it. Alternate is the computer system. So obviously the paperwork was first, so your computer system was developed secondary to that. And yeah, the test results go on that, the important stuff goes on that, fantastic. You can effectively switch between the two and it's not really a problem. Contingency, well, you're hoping that your patient is carrying around their information cards, which they never do, and your emergency plan is throwing diagnostic tests at the problem and hoping that you figure out what's going on. So what happens if we just stop using that paperwork primary? So we are on to just having the one computer system. So what happens, who's responsible for making sure that we have access to those patient records? It used to be us. We were responsible for maintaining those, an admin department that kept those records up to date and that they were accessible in an emergency. The backup plan is revert to paper. But we need a history. We can't just say, oh, let's just get out some paper and start going. We need the history. We need that information. So who's responsible for making sure there's a backup plan? We don't know. So if there's a ransomware attack, or someone decides they're going to smash a car into an important bit of infrastructure, I trust that the IT guys have got their backup. Yeah, that server on all its information, that'll be mirrored off-site somewhere. That's fine. But if I can't answer it, frankly, it's worth 3/5 of fuck all, because I've got a patient in front of me and I need that information. So we don't actually have any answers, and I think that the ransomware attack on the London hospitals will hopefully give them the little bit of a prod they need to start doing something in the same way that pathology issue was the prod that they needed. But at the moment, we don't know. This might well be the last one. We shall see how we go. So people-pleasing people. You can get anywhere in the NHS if you dress the part. All right. There's a few reasons for that. There's about 3 different reasons. The NHS is full of agreeable people, so I mean that technically. So in psychology, you have a major characteristic, a major trait called agreeableness. It means you want to help, nurture, all that sort of stuff. As you might imagine, those sorts of people get into healthcare. And what that means is, in that environment dominated by agreeable people, if you say no to something, you are, even if it's perfectly reasonable to say no to it, you are seen as being obstructive. And that's a bit of a problem, because it's also very hierarchical. So if you are a patient or a visitor, you're at the bottom. So imagine yourself trying to get into a ward, and you're buzzing at the little intercom thing, and someone's walking past. If you're a patient or a visitor, they are going to say, no, I'm not letting you in, you keep buzzing. But what happens if I put that on? What happens if I walk around with that little piece of paper that the NHS runs on, with a piece of patient information, that I've been writing down, all that sort of stuff? What if I'm on the phone, so I'm outside the ward? Look, mate, have you spoken to the GP? I'm not messing with it. Sorry, would you just get that door? Would you just get that door? You might say, well, I'm not wearing an ID badge. I will tell you that I didn't wear an ID badge in the NHS for over 10 years. I blagged myself into everywhere I needed to be because it was fun. But that's okay. That's okay, because I have an ID card printer. I made an ID card for the fish tank. It's on those Fishy McFishface as a consultant physiologist. And this reveals the last element of how you can quite easily bluff your way around hospitals. There is a normalcy bias. So when I come along with my stupid ID card and stick it in the fish tank, the question wasn't, Phil, why do you have an ID card printer? And the answer would be, well, it was £100 on eBay because it didn't come with a power supply, it was covered in mystery goo, and you can't say no to that. But what they actually said was, how did you get security to print you that? Because there's a normalcy bias. So, what happens if I'm now dressed like this, I'm tapping on the badge reader, which obviously isn't going to read this, would you let me in? You're probably going to do it. And that's that hierarchy, that normalcy bias, and that hyper-agreeable nature. And this actually did manifest in a couple of situations. So me and my boss, we were leaving for the day. There was a couple of workmen dressed very much like this chap. No ID badge, no visitors cards, nothing like that. They were in a public area of the hospital, so they could have walked in off the street. And they were poking up the ceiling tiles and having a look what was going on underneath them. We're walking out. They didn't talk to us, didn't look at us, and she says to them, do you need to get in this office? I can't stay, but I can leave the door unlocked for you. Now, what's in that office? 2,000 patient records and sterile medical equipment that obviously needs to be protected. Don't blame her. That's just the environment that is set up. And this was another one. This was in a public corridor. I don't know about you, but I see something like that and the intrusive thoughts of winning. All right? I have a burning need to know what's going on in there. And why is it there? Well, it's probably there because they need to be helpful. They are helping the people who are coming to collect it. Don't waste time coming into the ward. Don't worry, we're healthcare, we're off limits. I mean, for me, I see that and I'm thinking, I've got a liquid nitrogen mode on my motherboard. I could do something with that. But I have literally walked out with a printer under one arm, a PC under another arm, obviously with permission, walked out, thrown it into the back of my mate's very old clapped out Aldi that was full of plumbing equipment, and nobody stops me. No ID badge, no uniform, nothing. I think I'll be able to very quickly get through this. So this is back to the government being a problem. They wanted to create a central database of your GP records, and then sell access to that to large companies. So what they would do is take everything, anonymize it, and then bundling it to a great big data set and sell access to it. Actually, a fantastic idea. The stuff you could pull out of that is brilliant. Only problem is that I'm thinking about my information theory lessons and going, this feels bad. So I emailed my MP, and I got the perfunctory response. So I did the worst possible thing I could do. I stopped drinking for 2 days and I dusted off the other brain cell and I came up with this. I decided to be a smart ass about it. So what I pointed out was that you can de-anonymize, you can find out who somebody is with only 4 or 5 pieces of information. If you know someone is 59 male from Leeds and their job, you are 90% of the way there to figure out who they are. And of course, this data will be available in social media derived data sets that you can purchase from a data broker and in the medical records, whether they are anonymized or not. And obviously Google and so on do this all the time to follow what you're doing all over the internet. Problem is, when I came to write this presentation, I couldn't remember what any of that means, so I asked ChatGPT. And it agreed with me. So bearing in mind also, this was 2 years ago, so it was before the whole AI fad kicked off. So if you started now just saying, oh, we've got these 2 big data sets, AI, they would probably listen to you a lot easier without using long words. But essentially, very simple for a data scientist to mash these 2 data sets together. And what happens? You go to your GP complaining of angina. What goes on with angina and ischemic heart disease? Erectile dysfunction. So you're now getting adverts sent to your home IP address for erectile dysfunction medication. Sounds funny, but it really, really isn't. And anyway, I got 2 pages back from a lord. I felt very, very clever indeed. Obviously, I probably wasn't the only complainant, but they basically said, yeah, we're not doing that now. Until they can do a couple of things. First, create a trusted research environment. So you can access and manipulate and work on the data, but without stealing it and using it to find out who has erectile dysfunction. And they wanted a way for you to rescind consent, so you could retrospectively take your data out of that data set, which obviously means it won't be truly anonymous, but hey, that's something that they'll have to work out. And I'm going to leave it there, because I don't want to encroach on anyone else's time. If anyone has any questions for me, I will be probably hanging around the lockpicking area with my stupid high-vises, my stupid ID cards. I have lots of them, including the fish ones. Feel free to come and say hi if you've got any questions. Thank you.